today we're going to look at the farmers and the populist movement, or the People's Party as it was known during the time. The farmers were facing several problems in the late 1800s. I remember that they started to get out west, and during the land grab, so to speak, and they faced several problems. And one of these was the mortgage crisis. As we saw in the last couple of years here, a lot of people's houses, they couldn't get the mortgages or pay for their mortgages, and they lost their houses. Well, same thing was happening in the late 1800s. With crop prices failing, or falling, if you will, farmers mortgaged their farms so they could buy more land and attempt to break even. The thought was that, well, maybe we need to farm more to get some money coming in. Well, this really didn't work too well, and the banks, not the nice people that they are now, they foreclosed on farms who could not make their loan payments. Things have not changed with banks too much since the late 1800s there. Railroad companies was another problem. You had to get your crops to market, and wagons wouldn't hack it, so what they did, they got them on the trains. Well, railroad companies were charging such high rates for transportation and storage, sometimes it cost just as much to ship a bushel of grain, whether this was corn or oats or whatever it happened to be, as the farmers received for it. And so the railroads were partly to blame here. So farmers are really facing two major problems. The whole idea of the mortgage crisis and trying to get it transported to where they could sell their crop. The other one they were facing was deflation. Now, we've heard of inflation, where your money's not worth as much. The government puts more money in circulation, so what happens is it's inflated, it's not worth as much. Well, deflation occurs when the amount of money in circulation decreases. Therefore, the value of every dollar increases. And a good example of this during this time period, well, the bad news was because the farmers received less money for their crops. And so what ended up happening, they received less money for their crops. They could not make their mortgage payments. The railroads were charging really high rates. Farmers would try to buy more land to grow more crops. It just became a really vicious cycle, and a lot of farms were going under. Well, in response to this, they formed, after the Civil War, they formed what was called the Grange, or the Patrons of Husbandry. And these Granges they were organizations, social clubs, if you will, where the farmers could get together and respond to problems of the time. It was a place for them to gather, air their grievances. And these Granges buildings are still throughout Michigan here, Kent and Ottawa County. I believe there's one by Conklin. There's an old Grange building. I think there's one down by Caledonia, if I remember right. And these buildings are still in existence. They almost look like churches, if you will, fairly large buildings. And these were where the farmers gathered to air their grievances, commiserate, and get politically active. The Populist Party had some pretty good ideas. It was actually born in 1892, the People's Party, and a couple of their demands was to get rid of the debt from the farmers. The farmers were going under. There wasn't really no doubt about that. And it was also to give people a voice in their government. A good analogy to this, to the People's Party, you might think of the Tea Party, kind of a grassroots type of movement to give people a greater voice on how the government is operating. Maybe a little bit different philosophy, but the same type of idea. People were not happy with the way the government is working back then or now, so they formed some of these alternative parties. The reforms was increase the money supply. Inflation. If you put the increased money supply as inflation, there will be a rise in prices, and that's always a battle. How much inflation can the economy take? Right now, modern days time, inflation isn't real great, but it has been in years past. So if you have deflation, you take money out of the supply. If you have inflation, you increase the money supply. Graduated income tax. Tax higher incomes at higher rates. Sounds pretty familiar as we're looking at today. You know, they talk about the tax rate. There's a movement today to get a flat tax rate where everybody would pay 15% of your income. It hasn't got a whole lot of traction, but who knows down the road. They also wanted the election of U.S. senators by popular vote instead of being kind of elected in back rooms, so to speak, and by caucuses. The Populist Party wanted a single term for the president and vice president. Kind of interesting. We have 2 terms now. There's always this push at the people in Washington and even in our state legislatures are there way too long. So, you know, same thing back in this time period. Interesting, an 8-hour workday, which we do have. Typically, farmers work from sun up to sundown. Restrictions on immigration. We are hearing that now too, because what they found as the more people came over, especially from Western Europe and Eastern Europe, they gobbled up land out west. And the farmers, if they wanted to increase the number of their crops or their yield, quite often they'd have to get more land. Well, if you remember right, you know, the Homestead Act, if you could farm 160 acres of land for 5 years, the government would give it to you. So, you know, it's not too different than it is today on some of these problems of immigration. Well, what happened? There was a panic of 1893. Definitely farmers were overextended. Businessmen would lend these farmers equipment and supplies on loan, and the farmers couldn't repay these loans, so the businessmen, the shopkeepers were in dire straits of going out of business. Farmers were going bankrupt, and it was just getting to be a pretty untenable situation. Railroad companies started to fail. Well, farmers couldn't pay the prices to ship anything. Well, if the railroad companies can't make any money, they're going to fail. And this really caused a ripple effect throughout the whole industry. And if you look at the Panic of 1893, there's some statistics here. 1,500 businesses folded, 600 banks folded, and 3 million people lost their jobs. Not too unlike the crisis we had with the mortgage crisis here, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where some of the largest banks in the country really went into bankruptcy. Well, another thing the Populists wanted was, how will the money be backed? If you look at our money now, it's really, if you read it, what's on a dollar bill, "In God we trust," that is pretty much what's backing our money. Back then, money could be backed by the bimetallism, a policy in which the government would either give you gold or silver in exchange for your paper money. Supposedly, I heard a advertisement where you can go into a bank right now and exchange your paper money for silver. I guess there's a way to do that, and it is legal. I have not done it yet, so it'll be interesting. The Goldbugs favored baking money solely with gold. You know, at one time we were on the gold standard, gold currency, where you could exchange your money for gold. Well, that kind of went out of favor and went to silver. Some of you, or parents or your grandparents, may have silver certificates. Every once in a while you'll find one, and those could be redeemed immediately for silver at any bank. So we have a little chart here, Goldbugs and the Silverites. Who were they? Bankers and businessmen, farmers and laborers. The bankers and businessmen wanted the gold standard, less money in circulation. You know, they wanted that deflation. The farmers and laborers wanted more money in circulation. Bankers and businessmen, you know, you would have stable money. You know, the money would be worth more. The farmers and the laborers, they wanted that inflation, more money in circulation, so the products could be sold at higher prices. So really you're looking at two effects, and almost they're diametrically opposed here. The bankers and the businessmen wanted deflation so prices would fall and the value of money increases and fewer people have money. Where the farmers and the laborers wanted inflation, the value of money decreases, prices rise, and more people have money. Really on opposite sides of the spectrum. You know, as you can typically would see on something, you have people on either side of the spectrum, probably a compromise somewhere in the middle will probably be achieved. If you look at the current situation, you know, we have with the government shutdown, you know, it always seems like the last minute, but they do end up compromising. Well, populism didn't last forever. You know, it was an era. You know, you got the Democratic and Republican parties, you know, like we do now. You know, the Tea Party, and I hate to say it's on the fringe a little bit, but it is. And when William Jennings Bryan lost his bid for the Democratic nominee for president, the populist agenda pretty much ended there. He was kind of the big leader of this. And Bryant lost most of the voters in the East. Well, in the East, you had the old money there. You had a lot of factory owners. The industrial Midwest and the growing middle class went to McKinley, who was running against him at this time. And, you know, that pretty much, you know, spelled the end for the populism. So you had really the business people, shop owners, business owners, really wanted that whole idea of deflation. It's kind of interesting, though. The ideas of populism have lived on. And a message that the downtrodden could organize and have political impact, well, think about it. We're looking at the Tea Party here. And it did have an agenda of reforms. We have had numerous different times in American history, especially in my lifetime, where there's been an agenda of reforms. People get tired of the government. They're not happy which way things are going. And so, you know, the populist movement was kind of the start of the third party.